Taoiseach, firstly, I would like to express my support for government's stance and for Ireland's stance in terms of the Ukraine crisis. And I applaud what we have done, the waiving of visa restrictions and also allowing Ukrainian people to come in here and avail, hopefully, of employment at the earliest opportunity. Could I raise one issue with you, please, Taoiseach, which was raised with me, is in relation to some vacant property that might be available, particularly holiday homes, that people might be of a mind to make available to Ukrainian people. And they're wondering, is it possible for them to do this without creating tenancy rights or having short-term lettings? And maybe this is something that government may have a look at, because I think we have a difficulty in terms of how we are going to accommodate a significant number of Ukrainian refugees. Could I go on, please, Taoiseach, to talk just about the agricultural and food industry, if you please, an indigenous champion of this economy for many years, and it is the bulwark of our rural economy and the basis for regional regeneration. And I have concerns now building, and I'm reflecting concerns I'm hearing, that our climate policy now appears to be muddled in terms of where we are going with agriculture. And I think it wouldn't be a far stretch to say that potentially there's some confrontation building in public opinion between the agricultural sector and the needs of climate change. And as we're well aware at the moment, we have a commodities crisis, not least that Russia and Ukraine between them produce almost 30% of the world's wheat, 8% of the world's grain, 60% of the world's sunflower oil. And all of this is going to feed into primary producer prices here, and it's going to feed into the retail supply prices also. A significant one, as you know, Taoiseach, is the issue of fertiliser. And Russia is by far in a way the largest manufacturer of fertiliser, and now with sanctions this is driving up a price that's already up 300% year to date. This is going to have an effect on productivity, is going to have an effect on output, and it's certainly going to have an effect on pricing. And the farming sector has been raising this issue for some time I suppose, with little regard, I think, been taken at the moment. Also, the energy increases that government have committed to for May, the increase to fossil fuel prices, Taoiseach, again, is going to put extreme pressure on the sector. And I'd also highlight to you, Taoiseach, the issues of forestry. And despite the work the government has done, we are still way behind in processing licences, and almost 70% of licences that are being processed are being done for Coillte, in other words, for the state sector, at the expense of looking after rural and regional farmers who have invested in forestry. And one other issue, if I could bring up with you, Taoiseach, is the issue of wind energy. And we know that we will not have a regulatory maritime institution developed for 2 more years, but there is a process ongoing at the moment off the south-east coast in terms of onshore wind, which is close into shore within 5 kilometres. And there appears to be no regard to look at the development of offshore potential, as has been done in Scotland for this project. And I, as a south-east deputy Taoiseach, will tell you I will be at the vanguard of objecting to onshore wind in the UNESCO site of County Waterford. We need to look at offshore wind in that facility.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Deputy. I had the opportunity yesterday to meet with the 6 main farm organisations in government buildings, and we organised a meeting as a regular round table to talk about Brexit, to talk about CAP reform, to talk about climate action. But as you can imagine, as is often the case, events overtake you, and most of the meeting was about Ukraine, the cost of inputs, the rising cost of fuel and fertiliser, and how that will impact on food prices and also impact on farm incomes. And government this afternoon is going to be a special meeting of ministers this afternoon, chaired by the Taoiseach. It'll start at 2 o'clock, in fact, and there are really 3 items that we're going to consider. One is the humanitarian response. How can we assist Ukrainians who come to Ireland? And more importantly, how can we assist the millions of Ukrainians who won't come to Ireland but will be refugees in other parts of Europe? The second is sanctions and the political response. Is there more that we can do to show our support for Ukraine and our opposition to the Russian Federation and Belarus? And third, how are we going to deal with the economic impact? Another economic shock so soon after the last one. And how are we going to help households with rising bills? How can we help farmers with rising input costs? How can we can help the business sector as well? And there's only so much government can do, but there are things government can do, and we're going to consider them this afternoon. and I look forward to reporting back to the Dáil on that next week if I have the opportunity. Just finally, in terms of forestry licensing, I got a really good note from Minister Hackett there just the other day. After years and years of frustration, and I know the frustration is by no means gone, a real evidence of an uptick in the number of licences being granted. And I might send that note on to you because for the first time in a very long time I had some hope that we were making some progress. So it was for both actually, and one of the problems it seems with the planting is while licences are issued, certainly not all are being used.
Yeah, Tánaiste, I reflect what you're saying, but as I said, the majority of licences, they are for felling, firstly, and secondly, they are being prioritised for Cuilta and not for the small farmers who are trying to get afforestation licences, get roads built and get their own felling done. Could I just come back to the climate policy for a minute, if you please? And I'm certainly not against it, but I just think we do need a reappraisal of it. I note that government haven't made any, as far as I'm aware, they haven't revised the policy about increases to fossil fuel prices in May. I think that would be a very retrograde step in terms of inflation. And could I also just highlight again, Mara will not be developed, I think, for 2 years or longer. We still haven't discussed where we're going with the wind port in this country. I think we have to start designating wind ports. Rosslare is the obvious one. There are obvious benefits to housing in Dublin by diminishing some of the capacity in Dublin port. I think this needs to be seriously looked at. And also, again, Tánaiste, I know you're aware, and I think Minister Ryan is taking a call in the morning on the N24, but we need both the N24 and the N25 road upgrades to the southeast of Ireland to improve our connectivity and to give us some regional competitiveness. There are two roads that have not been invested in over 20 years. Tánaiste, I'll ask you to look at those, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Deputy. Just an aside in relation to forestry, rather, that there's a new programme, a new scheme that Minister Hackett has published and is working on at the moment to allow farmers to plant small plantations of trees. Very small, but still significant if everyone does it. And what we'd like to see is farmers using a small part of their land for small plantations, ideally with native broadleaf trees. And she's bringing that in and allowing them to avoid the existing licensing system for doing that. I think Mara is going to be up and running much sooner than 2 years' time. Hopefully we'll have it up and running in interim form in its new headquarters in Wexford this year, and up and running for real, if you like, next year. And I agree with you on Rosslare. That's definitely a port that we need to invest in when it comes to wind energy, because we're going to have a lot of offshore wind off the east coast as well as the west coast, but initially off the east coast. And we want to make sure that the turbines come from Irish ports and not from English ports. Not that we have anything against English or Welsh ports, but we'd like to use our own ports, and investment in Rosslare is going to be crucial in that regard.